So standardized is different than the term standard, right? So make sure that it's somehow you separate it in your brain. So standardized is an instrument that includes prescriptive procedures and materials and leads to a score that allows comparison of a child's score to the performance of a same age peers. So we're going to take and dissect that definition and apply it to what exactly standardized means. Because not every test that we give is a standardized test, okay, or a standardized assessment. So we really have to understand what that term standardized means. So when we take something and we apply the word standardized, it means that the instructions for the test are the exact same for every person who is giving the test. There is a very set procedure about how you administer this assessment. There's a very set procedure about how you score this assessment. Okay? When we take a look at the CLAS, the DRDP, and the ECHRS, there is an entire book that goes along with it on how to accurately score it so that it remains accurate. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why we spend so much time. If you were to pick up an ECHRS, how many of you, if you were to pick up an ECHRS and try to do it, you would fail miserably. Because it's standardized, it is very detailed about how you must score it. So when you have a test that's standardized, every single person administering the test should do it exactly the same way, should score it in exactly the same way. Okay? This is one of the reasons when you're sitting, go flashback to your elementary, and the teacher gives you your test booklet, and then what do they have in front of them? They have their test proctoring booklet, right? And they open it up and they say, students, open your book to test 1. You will have 5 minutes to answer question 1, 5 minutes, and they read through that, right? That's because it's a standardized test. They are technically not allowed to answer any questions that are not in the booklet, allow any clarification of any questions. So if a student raised their hands and said, I don't understand this word, for a standardized test, the teacher is not allowed to give any additional information. None. Otherwise, it doesn't become standardized. Because that teacher coming over and saying, if a child's reading, there are 6 inches of snow on the ground, 5 of it melts, how many inches of snow is left? And the child raises their hand and said, I don't know what snow is. A teacher cannot come over and explain to the child what snow is. Because then it is no longer standardized. Because the child in Alaska who's taking the test didn't have that information. Or the child in Ohio didn't have that information because their teacher didn't explain what snow was. So in order for the test to be standardized, the teacher is not allowed to give any additional information besides what is set in the instructions. Okay? This is what allows us to compare this scores with the children next door's scores. Because we know that this teacher in this first grade class gave the exact same test as the teacher in the first grade class on the other side of town. Otherwise, if the teacher sat there and opened the booklet and said, okay, so let's go through each of these problems and we're going to talk about any of the vocabulary words that are difficult, and you can ask some questions and I'll give you some background information. If we have one first grade teacher that does that, and another first grade teacher that picks up the book and reads it, and the children sit there and answer the questions, can we take their scores and compare them? Are they giving us the same information? No. So that's when we use the word standardized, that's what it means. Every single thing is the same. It's a very prescriptive. Remember when something's prescribed, it's all spelled out. You take 5 doses of this every 2 hours. So it's a prescription. Remember when you take a prescription, it tells you when. You don't just say, oh, I'll take 5 of them right now and 2 of them tomorrow. So think about that is the same. If it's not, then you can't compare the results with another class, with another child of the same age. Okay? So that's why we use the term standardized. So we see the benefits, but I hope you also see the severe limitations, right? So what are some of the difficulty when using standardized tests in assessing young children? They're pre-literate. What does that mean? Young children are pre-literate. If we look at 3, 4, 2-year-olds, what does the term pre-literate mean? What does the term literate mean? We can read, right? If we're not literate, we can't read. What is pre-literate? Before they can read. So they can't read. So who is reading the question to them? The teacher has to read the question. Well, certain teachers read the question differently. If I read a question, which one of these is not the right answer? Is that different than which of these is not the right answer? Is that a very different, am I saying the same words? I've said the exact same words, but I've read it differently. So do those two classrooms have the same score? If I have a teacher that says, which one is not the right answer, does that class, are they being asked a different question than the class next door where the teacher is saying, which one is not the right answer? Question 2. You have different questions being asked, right? Pre-literate children, they're relying on the person reading it to them to give them the information. Still much variability in the domains of development. Is there a huge span the younger we get of what children can do? What is the time span for walking? Like 7, 8 months to 18 months, 2 years sometimes. That's a huge span. So sometimes we can have it, if we look even at reading, let's apply it to reading. What is the appropriate, despite what most of testing says, what is the appropriate time span that children's brains are ready to read? What's the appropriate time span? Answer that. 4 to 8 years old. All research shows us that a child's brain might not be ready to read until 8 years old. When do we require them to read in schools? By the end of kindergarten. Otherwise, they have what?